All right, so we are going to talk just for a few more minutes about interview questions and rating scales, and I will give some examples. And this will help us on our assignment this week and into next week as we are still working on talent acquisition, and then we will wrap it up next week and get into compensation and then the last section of our HR unit. All right, so like we talked about last week, we have two different types of interviews. We have the structured and we have the unstructured. So I have some example questions for both. A lot of people will kind of bounce between a structured and an unstructured interview. They might have a few questions that are structured to kind of gauge how every person responds to them, and then they'll throw in some unstructured questions. So it does not have to be strictly one or the other. I would actually bet that most HR managers are combining a little bit of both and pulling elements from both structured and unstructured interviews. So some examples of structured interview questions would be things like if the interviewer asks you to just tell them about yourself, kind of give them an elevator pitch, a little bit of background about your education, your work experience, and what you are planning for your future. They might ask you why you chose that specific industry. So, why did you choose the healthcare industry, the education industry? And they are looking for you to give an explanation and show why you're passionate about this career path. They might ask you why you chose for this specific position when there are other, or this specific company, because there are a lot of companies in various industries. So they're looking for why you chose their specific company and this specific position. And this would be a good way to incorporate some of the information that you should have already researched for your cover letter and when you are going into writing your resume. You should be doing a little bit of research. That way you know how to tailor it all. So this would be a great way where you can slip in some of that information that you learned about the company or that you learned about the position to kind of enhance your interview skills. They might ask you what types of projects you want to work on, and what you have worked on, what you like to work on, what your favorite part of that industry is, and then maybe some situational questions. So tell me about a time that you worked in a team or with other people. Most jobs you're going to be working closely with others, so they kind of want to see how you handle, group work or projects or disagreements in the workplace. And then some unstructured interview questions could be things based on looking at your resume. So tell me about a time that you worked at this company or in this position. And then jumping down to that last one, very similar. Tell me about your involvement with this organization, this activity, this sport, something like that. Those are going to be unstructured because everyone is going to have different involvements and different work history. So those two questions are very specifically based on your resume. They might ask you some behavioral questions like describe your best day at work that you've had so far. Where do you think that you've been the most successful in either your work or your school life up until this point? And then, where do you see yourself in 5 years? That is a really good question because they might not necessarily want to hire somebody if they think that you are going to work here for just a few years and then be trying to climb the ladder and move up. Not that it is a bad thing to want to move up in a company, but they want to make sure that you're going to be here for the long haul. So if you are looking for, advancement and management positions, is this a company that has those kind of opportunities for you, or are you just going to get some experience and then leave the company for somewhere else? So those are some examples of both structured and unstructured interview questions that a lot of managers use. And we need to talk about rating scales a little bit again. So I have some examples on the screen. As you can see, like we talked about last week, both examples start out with a table where they give some personal information for the interviewee. So what is their name? What's the date? Who's interviewing them? And then what is this position for? That way I can keep them all in order and I remember all of the people who applied for the position of a medical intern. And that way I can go back and I can compare them later. The second box is where things are a little bit different between the two. And I think it is definitely important that you mix some of the elements that both of these rating scales have. So we can see on the left hand side that the first question that they have is, was the candidate prepared for the interview? So did they do research of the company? Are they dressed appropriately? Did they arrive on time? And then their rating scale is poor, okay, or great. So we can see that questions 1 through 5 are really more about how you felt about the candidate. So did they have the required job experience or education? Do they have good communication skills? Did you feel like they were confident when they were talking to you? Does their resume look good? So these aren't necessarily about very specific questions that you ask them. This is kind of about the overall feeling that you got from the candidate. And those can be just as important as the answers to the specific questions. So they have the criteria on the left-hand side, they have their rating area, and they have small boxes where you can describe and write notes. On the right hand rating scale, it is a little bit different. So they have a kind of a legend where they show you what a 0 would mean versus what a 5 means. And then their categories or their criteria are the specific questions that they asked. So, question 1, why did you choose the blank industry? I can then rate them from a 0 to a 5, and then I have a bigger box to leave comments. Another big thing on this rating scale on the right hand side is this bottom box. That way I can look at their overall score, and then I can write maybe my final impression or some last minute comments. Scores that have, or rating scales that have this last box at the bottom can be very helpful whenever you're going through and narrowing down candidates. So you might say that I have 50 people that applied and interviewed for this job. I really want to narrow it down to the top 10. So you're going to look at the overall score, and you might say, pick out the top 10 highest scores. And then those are the ones that you're going to go through and read the comments for again, read the ratings for again, to help you kind of narrow down your interviewing selection and make your final choice. So those are some elements that are important for rating scales that we can kind of pick at whenever we are making our own for our assignment this week.